Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon if you're looking at this in the afternoon. This is to be a little bit of information about your notes on page 53, The Roots of Sectionalism. These notes were uploaded as an image, and they have the 3 paragraphs that I'm going to talk about numbered 1, 2, 3. Could have been ABC, but life goes on. Some background information first. The Founding Fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, were extremely clever, extremely intelligent men. They were also very good at using language. They were very good at using language to express things without necessarily saying those things. And what we're about to talk about is a perfect example of that. So if you look at the first paragraph that I have on the roots of sectionalism, first off, you'll notice it's in quotes. It's in quotes because I took that from the Constitution. I'm quoting it. But you'll also notice that it's in brackets. It is in brackets to show you that it is no longer an applicable, or it no longer applies to the United States anymore. A lot of times if you look at the Constitution, you'll see sections that have been put into brackets or have a line going through the words. That shows that either an amendment or other laws or other changes have been made that make that section no longer apply to the United States anymore. And this is one of those instances. When you were in civics, you learned about the Three-Fifths Compromise that allowed states to count slaves as 3/5 of their population when determining what their population was in determining representation for the House of Representatives. Paragraph 1 is the Three-Fifths Compromise written out. And so it talks about representation and, representatives and taxes being determined based upon a couple of different things. So if we take a look at the text, we'll skip over the first line and a half, and we'll start where it says, which shall be determined. So the population, or the number of people living in the state, would be determined by adding the whole number of free persons. Notice it doesn't say white people, it just says free person, because they had to be able to include free blacks, as well as half black, half white, things of that nature, people of that nature rather, including those bound to service for a term of years. This would include people possibly that were apprentices. It could also include people that were in jail because they were bound for a certain number of years, and they may have been doing work while they were bound in jail. And excluding Indians, not taxes. First off, where it says not taxes, it should say not taxed. I'm going to have to go back and fix that, so I apologize for having a typo there. I don't know why I've never noticed it before, but sorry. So let's go back. According to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound for service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed. So the people that were counted as part of the population were free people, including people bound for a term of service, and Indians that were taxed. Those are the 3 groups of people that were counted as part of the population. Then it goes on to say, and I've got it italicized in bold, 3/5 of all of the persons. Now this is where the Founding Fathers get really slick with their wording. It says other persons. It doesn't say blacks, doesn't say untaxed Indians, it doesn't say slaves. In fact, the word slave is not used anywhere in the Constitution. The first place that the word slavery shows up in the Constitution is the 13th Amendment, passed in 1865, that banned slavery in the United States. So the Founding Fathers were very slick. The whole number of free persons, but it doesn't say enslaved persons. It doesn't say slaves. It just says free people, people bound to service, and Indians that are taxed. Even though it doesn't say specifically Indians that are taxed, it says excluding Indians not taxed. So slaves aren't mentioned in the Constitution. Go on to paragraph 2. After the Constitution was ratified, as the Constitution was going through the ratification process, there were several states that were very, very concerned that there was no Bill of Rights. They were afraid that the Constitution was too powerful. That this government that the Constitution would create was going to be way more powerful than necessary. And they were afraid that their rights would be taken away by this too powerful government. And that a Bill of Rights, like the one England had that was created in 1689, needed to exist to make sure that the government couldn't take away the rights of the people. So when 1789, when this government goes into effect, James Madison, James Madison, the author of the Virginia Plan that goes on to become the Constitution, he is elected to the House of Representatives, and he takes it upon himself to collect suggestions from the states for what should be included as a Bill of Rights, because the Virginia Plan goes on to be the Constitution. It's something he wrote. He took it as a kind of a personal mission, to make sure that any flaws that existed in the Constitution were corrected. So when he sends out the 12 potential amendments to the Constitution, the first 10 are ratified, these become our Bill of Rights. So paragraph number 2 under the Roots of Sectionalism is amendment number 10. And this is a very powerful and important amendment because it still pops up in the news today as a matter of arguing over who has the power to do certain things. And this is called the States' Rights Amendment. It's called the States' Rights Amendment because, let's look at the text, powers not delegated or given to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, meaning the states say they can't, the U.S. government can't do it, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That means anything not written in the Constitution as being a power of the Constitution, being a power of the U.S. government, it then falls back to being something that the states have to handle themselves. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the word slavery or slave. That means if an issue pops up, according to the 10th Amendment, regarding slavery or slaves, it is not something that the United States government has power delegated to it to handle. Therefore, it is a state's right to deal with the issue of slavery or slaves. This was a widely held belief by states that owned slaves prior to the Civil War. It was their right to own slaves because the 10th Amendment says if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, then it is a matter for the states to handle. The United States government has a different opinion on this matter. Rather, some of the free states and their representatives and senators have a different opinion on this matter. Representatives and senators from slave states fall back on the States' Rights Amendment. And so, because it's not mentioned in the Constitution, slavery or slaves, it creates a loophole. And it creates a loophole that with the 10th Amendment, states can say, this is our issue to deal with. Not the United States government. The United States government has no authority over slavery at all. Only the states. And interestingly enough, this is what causes, in part, sectionalism, which we'll get to defining tomorrow. but you can figure out sectionalism. We have sections in our notebook. We have sections of units. It's a separate part. So the United States is splitting apart into sections. A section that has slavery, sections that don't have slavery, but other issues that are going on in those sections as well. But it's very interesting to note that at the Philadelphia Convention that makes the Constitution, that writes the Three-Fifths Compromise, that uses the term other persons in place of slaves, that James Madison made the observation that, and this is from paragraph 3 on your paper, at the Constitutional Convention, the states were divided into different interests, not by their difference of size, but principally from their having or not having slaves. It did not lie between the large and small states, it lay between the Northerners and Southerners. This is an amazing observation that he makes. No matter what other differences there were between the states, whether it was an economy based on farming, whether it was an economy based on other industries, whether it was an area that had a great deal more immigrants from Europe, or an area that had a smaller number of immigrants, he made the observation that it did not matter whether a state had a large population, a small population, whether it had one kind of economy or another kind of economy. He realized that the biggest difference between all of the states was one issue, and that was whether or not they had slaves. And he noticed beyond that, that difference lay in whether that state was in the north or in the south. I hope this video helped explain to you this, the roots of sectionalism. We will be stepping out beyond this to give examples of how this use of just other persons and then the 10th Amendment with anything not mentioned in the Constitution belonging to the states will then lead to problems between the states and the U.S. government, or at least people in the U.S. government that wanted to end slavery. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.